Hello and welcome to Eastern Horizon. This is Malik Ayub Sumbul, and we are live on Facebook, X, and YouTube of Eastern Horizon. Tension in Iran has been reducing for the last couple of hours, but the Western media narrative still trying to build the regime change and trying to give a different picture than the actual the situation on ground. So, to discuss this, I have joined from Beirut, Lebanon, Seema Etaim. She is the director of the content and social media, and she is the editor of the Cradle, one of the credible news website that give a very objective analysis and reporting on different issues. Thank you very much, Seema, for joining me from Beirut.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
So, being a director of the content and the social media, so let me know
Yeah.
that the Iran. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah. So let me know that what's where the Iran's revolution is going on, because the social media is full of the revolution and the hashtags, but on the ground situation, we saw that there are pro-government's massive rallies and the protests that comes out into the streets of Tehran, but we did not see much on the Western media.
Yeah, the reason you're not going to see that on the Western media is because what Israel and the US primarily, along with their European allies, are trying to do is manufacture consent for further attacks on Iran through atrocity propaganda centered around government forces targeting protesters. Now, these were legitimate protests, but they were hijacked early on. Protests that had based on legitimate grievances, the economic situation, the inflation, economic mismanagement, of course, under the umbrella of sanctions. Now, it's important to keep in mind that the protests did not exceed 1% of the population. And as I just said, they quickly deteriorated into riots and violence. Now, the counter rallies that we saw on Monday, and even now, today, you have Iran burying a lot of its martyrs, and there's very big crowds who have come out to mourn these martyrs that were killed during the violence. The counter rallies really were a decisive turning point because they showed they were historic. They disrupted this narrative, and this attempt to destabilize the country. And more importantly, what these rallies really did was not just disrupt events on the ground, but on a more important level in narrative warfare, they disrupted the narrative momentum, basically, because a huge part of what's been happening around Iran is a perception war. And they are manufacturing the idea that the country is like there's a revolution going on and they're on the verge of this massive anti-government uprising. So in that sense, the rallies in support of the government really functioned as counter propaganda in the most positive way possible, whether you like this term or not. But this directly challenged the online narrative that's being aggressively pushed outside Iran, where social media is quite literally creating the illusion of a revolution and of inevitable collapse. So perception-wise, it's a very significant blow to the idea that the entire country is unified and moving in one direction, and they all want to get rid of the government, and they all want the exiled crown prince Reza Pahlavi to come back and take power. Social media is a very big part of this because we have seen the online manipulation during previous events. In Iran, one of the biggest mistakes people make is when they assume that everything they're seeing is organic and grassroots, and that it's all real voices coming from inside Iran and it's all real momentum. But we've had several investigations, both by Haaretz and The Marker, that was backed by technical analysis from Citizen Lab, and another account by another investigation by Social Forensics that shows that these are Israeli-linked influence operations targeting Persian language social media. So according to those findings, there are many fake accounts, networks of fake accounts that are pushing videos, deep fakes, fabricated on the ground reports, and they're centered around specific events, like during the 12-day war on Iran in June, or during the killing of Mahsa Amini in 2022, when we also saw hijacked protests. So some of these accounts post things before they even happen. They post false news, like entire cities have fallen to the protesters and they've taken over government facilities. So they don't just spread, but they trigger unrest, they incite unrest, they urge people to take to the streets. And the second investigation also looked at something bigger, which was the structure of the Persian Twitter, of the Iranian Twitter sphere. And they analyzed 1.5 million tweets from over 200,000 accounts. And they found that the Twitter sphere is actually one of the most heavily manipulated digital spaces on the planet. So the conclusion was that literally, like, almost roughly 95% of these so-called monarchist pro Reza Pahlavi accounts were fake. And these accounts, again, they mobilize around key moments that are happening to manufacture a certain narrative. So this is a pattern that's really impossible to ignore, because real grief, real anger against the government gets hijacked and amplified and distorted. And it's this online campaign, very brutal campaign, coupled with the agents of chaos on the ground who are armed and recruited and paid to not only kill police and government forces, and we've had probably nearly at least 200 police and government forces killed in the last less than 2 weeks, but also to kill other protesters, to inflate the casualties and pin all casualties on the government to be able to manufacture consent for this attack and ongoing regime change effort, which has been continuing for decades on and off through hybrid warfare. So really the question is, when we see things online, we should be like, who's benefiting from this? Who is boosting this content? Are these voices really inside Iran? And again, when you have a clear effort for regime change, and when you have this time around, it's historic, because you don't only have the Iranian authorities saying that the Mossad is involved, but the Mossad itself has declared, and Israeli officials have declared, that they are on the ground with those in Iran, helping them. You had the Mossad Farsi language account on X saying, "We are with you." You had Mike Pompeo saying, "Happy New Year" to every Iranian and every Mossad agent walking alongside them. You had the heritage minister declaring that their agents are operating on the ground in Mossad. This is no longer a conspiracy theory. You know what I'm saying? So information warfare, coupled with agents on the ground, you have armed elements that they are burning down mosques, attacking ambulances, paramedics, firefighters, firefighting vehicles, children. A 3-year-old girl was killed while going to the pharmacy with her father. A nurse was burned alive while trying to save her patients. And so now we are seeing all of this propaganda of all these bodies, that have been as if they have all been murdered senselessly by the Iranian forces, when in reality, the numbers aren't as much as they're inflating them. And those who have very unfortunately been killed have been killed by agents and government forces. And government forces up until Friday were unarmed, by the way. They were unarmed, and we saw countless footage of police and security forces being beaten brutally, senselessly, and tragically murdered. And we were like, where are they? They're not even armed. Then they really cracked down, and there was this atmosphere of martial law. They cut off the internet and they cracked down, because if you're waging war on Iran through agents on the ground, Iran will have to fight back. It is unfortunate about the casualties, but you cannot expect Iranian authorities to not take up arms. You know what I'm saying? When they are having a war waged, it's like a continuation of the 12-day war. It's just in a different form. You know what I mean?
Indeed. So let me come up with another question, that in United States or in the West, if such kind of the protesters and they attack, especially the law enforcement agencies, police, so what would be the reaction from these countries? Because 250 police and security personnel has been killed by the protesters. So how the Western treatment would be with such kind of the protesters? Can you please explain?
Yeah, you mean if it was the U.S., we saw what happened with the ICE shooting. An innocent woman was murdered, and they rationalized it and justified it as self-defense. You see, we know how brutally they treat protesters who are disrupting.
Not only this, but we saw many other how they pin down, and especially they're handcuffed, and especially then smash their windows and then immediately crush them. So,
and beating them, and they shoot immediately when they see a perceived threat. They shoot immediately. Like if you're walking towards them, they might shoot you.
Yeah. So this different treatment by the US that adopts inside and outside. Mean how it seemed that it is some special kind of the treatment that used against those countries who don't listen to United States.
100%, because Iran is a country that is defying Western diktats by trying to have its own economy over its to have sovereignty over its economy and over its own resources. And don't forget, it poses a big threat to Israel, which is a very big problem for the US. And so, of course, there will be double standards all the time when it comes to these kinds of situations. So if you have a very brutal regime in the UAE or Bahrain, for example, it doesn't matter because they are in the Washington-Israel axis. But if it is, Iran or Venezuela or Syria during the rule of Assad, then of course, all of a sudden we care about human rights. When in reality, they are only using this as a pretext to crush, Iran, which is really one of the last standing bastions of defiance against Western imperial and hegemony in the region. And if people cannot see it through this lens, then there is a problem, because you cannot have idealism here. Even if you oppose the government and you know what is going on, you cannot support the regime change. You don't have to be pro-Islamic Republic if you don't want to be, but you have to be aware of the regime change efforts, and it's a very important point, to be honest with you. Going from the double standards, I might a bit just change the subject a bit, because we have to talk about how these protests started, and why they were very, legitimate. You have serious problems with the economy. The currency has essentially collapsed. You have the middle class being disappeared by sanctions and by economic mismanagement. And so really, what these violent riots and armed agents and elements did was destroy the hope for these merchants and shopkeepers and traders in the bazaars in Tehran, who started this movement by trying to strike and paralyze the economy to force the government to act. Now there is no hope for any meaningful change or results from the government. They have every right to protest against their government. And another thing that is not being shown in Western media is that, as I said, before Friday, the authorities were not armed. So when they got armed, then people started to cry about, oh my God, the internet is out and the Iranian authorities are committing a genocide. There are many videos of medium to large size protests of people walking and chanting against the government, and nobody is shooting at them, because they do not aimlessly shoot at people for walking or holding up a sign or chanting. If you are in a crowd and there are people armed with rifles, hunting rifles and grenades, then you might get shot either by a rioter or by the government authorities who are trying to disperse the chaos and keep the peace. So really, if you look at the numbers, all of a sudden, it went from apparently 2,000 killed to 12,000 killed in just 2 days. This is like insane atrocity propaganda that only a person who has no clue what's going on could possibly believe. So, of course, with the U.S. and it's not just the U.S., it's the U.S. and Germany, for example, so many other regimes that have cracked down on protesters in such violent ways, and nobody bats an eyelid. Okay, so it's all about which country is being targeted, and Iran is among the most targeted countries. We're at a very critical moment when it comes to what's going on and how people should try to understand the context of things. It's very unfortunate because everyone has a right to protest, but we cannot stand with these protests when they have been hijacked 3 days in.
So mostly the Iran accused that there is a foreign intervention, and even Iran has a proof that the weaponization to these protesters has been done by the United States and Israel. So how you comment this, that do you think that which foreign intervention had ignited this kind of flare up this protest?
Definitely the Israeli Mossad and the CIA, especially since, as I told you, they openly declared their involvement many, many times over. In fact, just 2-3 days ago, the Israeli government had to instruct its ministers and other media figures to stop making comments about this, but the damage was already done because they had come out and talked about how they were doing this. And even just today, you had a commentator on Israel's Channel 14 saying they didn't name themselves, but they said foreign intelligence is arming them and they are killing the police. So the proof doesn't come only from the authorities of Iran, which I'm sure they have the proof. The proof this time comes from the Israelis themselves. And if you couple with this with Trump's rhetoric, you see that Trump and Israel are working together to escalate this war on Iran. So it's definitely the Israeli Mossad. And I do not doubt, because again, previous times it would be like, oh, but this is just what the government says to make excuses. But this time it's like we actually have the proof from both sides here that this is what's going on. So it's not
exactly.
Yeah.
It's
so
not, the
not
Iranian
debatable.
diasporas, the Iranian diasporas are pretty much into an illusion that they are waiting for the revolution and then they will come back to Iran. So this social media imagery that is mostly faked. So how do you think that it's affecting those diasporas' minds and trying to build a narrative at a very mass level? Because I think that we saw a trend that when such kind of regime change doctrines applied by the United States, so they always come up with the Starlink roving around in the clouds, and I think that giving a free access. So how do you think that this regime change doctrine is working, especially the Iranian diasporas? How do you think that their mindset?
Because of their leanings, and they are usually people who, if you're talking about monarchists, Iranian diaspora, they are people who tend to be Zionists. They are people who tend to threaten verbally and physically anybody who disagrees with them. And now that they have on their social media feeds this idea that like Iran is about to fall and there's millions in the streets, when in reality, the maximum number it reached was maybe 25,000 across the entire country and a population of 90 million. They are, like you said, they are living in their own bubble of, okay, this is it. This is the final battle. And Pahlavi will return, and it's just a little longer and we will return and everything. The problem is inside Iran. If you're talking about like inside Iran versus diaspora, inside Iran, even those who hate the Islamic Republic government also hate Reza Pahlavi. So the diaspora are completely disconnected from reality, to be honest with you. And they are part of this, push, basically. And they are, I think, very misled when it comes to what they are being shown on their social media feeds and how they are partaking this. I don't know if you saw the protest that took place in European countries at the Iranian embassy. You have all the diaspora monarchists, waving the Shah's flag with the Israeli flag. And bombing, hoping, wishing for Trump to bomb their country so that he can liberate it for them. So most people in Iran, I can say this even as though I am not an Iranian and I have been to Iran, but I do not live there. I can say it confidently, even though I'm not an Iranian, that most people in Iran who are against the current government do not want the exiled clown prince to return to Iran and rule over them. You know what I'm saying? Definitely Reza Pahlavi will instantly become allies with the UAE, Israel, and the USA. They will lose complete control over their sovereignty. And of course, my take, if you ask me as Seema, over and above resource control, which is very important, they just want to neutralize any kind of threat to the illegitimate state of Israel. This is really the main thing here. And you see that Reza Pahlavi and his supporters around the world in the diaspora are extremely pro-Israel. They did not open their mouths while there is ongoing genocide in the Gaza Strip or ongoing ethnic cleansing and displacement in the 1948 territories or the occupied West Bank. So it's clear, the alignment is very clear. And then, of course, you have the people in the middle who would like to see change, but they don't want Reza Pahlavi. And that's more of a real insight to take from Iran, as from what I've seen, is even those who would prefer another government do not want Reza Pahlavi. And in my opinion, anybody who is aware of what's happening needs to understand that it's better to try to force the government to into reforms, even in this very difficult situation. When your country is being targeted and hollowed out by sanctions, you have to exercise patience. The people are suffering a lot. They are suffering a lot in Iran, but they need to understand that this is all happening under the umbrella of brutal US sanctions. The Iranians cannot even get as the government, it does not even get the full oil revenues. Everything is cut off. Now there are these 25% tariffs announced by Trump the other day with Iran's trading partners. So of course, I think when you come to diaspora versus Iranians inside Iran that have grievances, it's two completely opposite situations.
Okay. So Iran was that in the case of any unilateral action by United States, Iran will respond. So in that situation, where you think that things could head, and what could be the extreme situation in the Middle East? Because we saw that Middle East previously, the Iran-Israel, the war, I think that was quite that shows the world about the Iran missiles technology. And so which kind of reaction can come from Iran?
It could be a combination of things. It could be a response to U.S. bases and assets in the region in any or all Gulf countries, or it could be let's respond in Israel because Israel is the number one kind of U.S. vassal state in the region, or it could be both. It really depends. We don't know exactly how it will look. But we know that Iran has recently warned its Gulf friends that any Gulf country that aids or assists the US and Israel in any way will be a legitimate target for Iran. So we might see Qatar again. We might hopefully see the UAE being targeted, some assets in the UAE. There are a lot of options, Even in Iraq, there are options for US assets. But it could be a response just to Israel, or it could be US bases. It really depends, It really depends on what the situation is and on what kind of attack they are responding to.
Mm-hmm. So in a developing multipolar world, we saw that what United States did in Venezuela, and then simultaneously the United States comes towards Iran, and ultimately it's looked like in Venezuela they were saying that it was the narco terrorism charges, but at the end it comes that the US will take the oil resources from there.
Yeah.
So I think it seems like in Iran, it's a similar strategy that the US is going to apply. So do you think that it's all about the hunting the oil resources and that these things in a multipolar world, how you think that it could be given a pause, especially this United States aggression that is increasing day by day. And I think that on the other side, we see a multipolar world is emerging.
Yeah, well, countries have to unify and act, and there have to be consequences. There have to be consequences for the U.S. and Israel. Otherwise, they will not stop the rampage they're on. And you mentioned, Venezuela with the oil, and then there was all these allegations. Well, and with Iran, the excuses will keep changing. We saw last time that it was about the nuclear program. Okay, as I said before, for me, really, this is about protecting Israel's security and crushing anybody who can pose any threat to Israel, as Iraq once posed a threat to Israel, as Syria once posed a threat to Israel. Lebanon's Hezbollah, the Yemenis, the Ansar Allah and Sana'a, they still pose a threat. So this is really a big part of it. And as you know, I'm sure you know, we saw in 1953 in Iran what happened when the democratically elected prime minister tried to nationalize the oil industry and refused the instructions of the West. And even before the 50s, and since the 20s, you have the US and Britain trying to exercise complete resource control over Iran. But the layer about Israel is a very important layer here because it's really the more urgent one. So it's really a combination of all these things. And if it really, you want my honest opinion, there has to be severe consequences for them to change course and stop their rampage. And there's a micro example that I can give you. which was when the US was defeated by Yemen's Ansar Allah in the Red Sea and had to opt for a ceasefire. And they pretended it was the Yemenis who begged for the ceasefire. But that was the most challenging naval warfare for them since World War II. And you see there how they left Yemen alone. The US stopped bombing Yemen and left Israel alone to bomb Yemen. And you see, this is a small example. You need an example like this on a larger scale. You need to exercise a very severe deterrence in order to have this kind of behavior stop. Because I think that statements of condemnation from even countries allied to Iran, like Russia and China, who also have their own issues to deal with, but statements of condemnation in general do not, do anything. There needs to be some kind of unified, push. Not just condemning, I mean, some kind of military action on the ground. I mean, severing diplomatic relations, expelling embassies. All of this needs to happen as a coordinated, unified push. But unfortunately, we see that the camps are not as unified as they should be. So that is, in my opinion, the only way to stop this, or curb it, at least, slow it down, at least, When you have Trump in the White House, there's only so much you can do to stop him. But you want to try to thwart, his destructive plans. So I really do believe that in this world now, what we've seen, especially after the Gaza genocide, if you do not act directly, I don't think you can stop this. You see him now. He's talking about Greenland. He's talking about Cuba. It doesn't matter. It's it needs to be a global, unified push against this. I don't know how, but yeah.
So we saw that the United States regime change, especially in Middle East, we saw Arab Spring, and then we saw recently many countries, because the US enter in the name of the regime change and then destabilize the countries, take their resources, go back and abandon them. So being Iran, do you think that the Iranian nation is resilient? And I think that there is a strong religious factor that make them quite united. So do you think that in Iran, this regime change doctrine has badly failed by the United States, and now the US is trying to make some massive level mess in Iran?
I think it has failed over and over again, and that is why they are going to keep trying. Like, if we see a strike now on Iran and the government doesn't fall, they will just keep trying and trying and trying. We have seen previously how many times they failed. So it's correct. You are correct when you say that that the Iranian people are resilient, and that the US continues to fail. What worries me is that the security situation on the ground can deteriorate, even if the protests are not as big as social media is making it out to be, because you also have, which they use these things every time, but you have armed separatists on Iran's borders. You have a lot of people being recruited on the border with Afghanistan. You have pan-Turkic separatists on the border with Azerbaijan. You have the Kurdish separatists on the border with Iraq. You have in the south east, you have also the Jaish al-Adl from the Balochistan area. So really, it's about how will they play their cards, because up until now, as you said, they've failed. And you're right that the religious element is part of it, but even the Iranians who are not religious and are against religious authorities are very resilient and aware. Many of them were during the 12-day war, when Iran was being bombed by Israel. All of those who are against the government actually stood with their government, because they saw the bigger picture. It's like, in an ideal world, they realized that in an ideal world, we should have a better government. But in this situation, the alternative will be worse. And there is this national awareness, actually more so among Iranians than what we saw in the case of Syria, for example. The Iranians have a very high sense of national awareness. So they have failed so far, the US and Israel. And this is why they are now amplifying the aggressive rhetoric and tactics online and atrocity propaganda. I mean, it's insane to claim that 12,000 people were killed in just a matter of days. It's absolutely insane. Nobody has a true number of the killed on the ground in Iran. So yes, they are failing, but it's just worrying to see how much will they escalate and what kind of cards will they play the more they continue to fail.
Thank you very much, Seema Altam. I really appreciate your insight, and I think that I got a lot of, the deep analysis about the ground situation, and also especially the hypocrisy of the Western media and this sensationalism in the media. So we will keep on Iran, and I will invite you in more couple of my live streamings.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. Thank you.